Consider This with Carol Schrader is made possible with support from Bass & Associates, First Data Resources, and by Nebraskans for Public Television. Consider This with Carol Schrader, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bale Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello, welcome back to Consider This. I'd like to have you consider this, the state of the homeless in Omaha and the effects of the dynamics of welfare reform and other socioeconomic influences on the home situation of the people in our community. With me today are Paul Koch. He's with the Sienna Francis House. He also is head this year of a sort of a coalition of people, of shelters, that worries about the continuum of care for those who are displaced in the Omaha Metro. And we'll talk about that later.
Great.
Also with us is Judy Mascarello. She heads up the Stevens Center shelter, and it's a little more diverse and a little more broader than just a shelter in the South Omaha area. And also Pastor Dan Havanek is with the Open Door Mission, and he heads, and Lydia House, and he heads up community service programs there. I want to welcome you, very busy people, to come together at this time. And I'm just going to, open this up. Let's just have a discussion. But I think maybe it's just the silly news media people that do this every year about the fall. They go, it's cold, it's time for the homeless and shelter story. And
And thank goodness that you do.
I guess it's, we have sort of a mental calendar, especially when you've been in it year after year, the things you don't want to forget, really. Does that ever bother you? You can almost plan it, can't you?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's excellent that it's done, because if you didn't do it during that time of year, we may be forgotten completely.
So well.
There's a definite advantage to it, and no, it doesn't bother us. At least for me, our organization doesn't spend money on advertising and public relations, so that kind of coverage is very important to us and very important to the people that we serve.
Is this a time of year where the ebb and flow of the shelter, I want to almost say business, but it's not, but you know what I'm using that in a broad sense, the shelter biz gets, changes, the complexion. I don't mean facial complexion, but I mean the makeup. Does seasons have anything to do with it?
Oh, definitely for us it does, because really at this time of year we're gearing up for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and we're really looking forward to that. We have 1,200 kids who will come out to a Christmas party, and we can give them gifts. We'll have 600 or 800 people come to the Thanksgiving dinner, serve 4,000 meals, and so we look forward to that. It's an exciting time for us, but not for everybody.
I think that at the Stevens Center, we look forward to it too. It is a very, very busy time of the year. Like you say, we're preparing for the holidays. We have a lot of people calling in that want to do volunteering. We have a lot of people who want to adopt families, and so we adopt out the families in our shelter and in our transitional living program. But I think that there are certainly times, at least at our shelter, that it would be nice to have Christmas in July.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, we are creatures of calendar. We are filled with the spirit a little more sometimes of the year than we are others. News media people also do another thing, which is just, in a way, terrible. But we do it because we try to help paint a picture, and it's the numbers game. When we talk about homeless or those that, and we can define that, maybe you should define it. What are we talking about in Omaha, Nebraska, Metro Omaha, Nebraska, right now?
The estimates in the community, and it's a broad range right now, are between 1,500 and 2,000 people on any given day are homeless. Now, the people who are homeless are not necessarily homeless for the entire year. There may be as many as 15,000 people that will go through the shelter system or be in need of homeless services throughout the course of a year.
Say that number again.
15,000 different individuals.
Yeah, it might be a week, it might be 2 months. I really, to be honest with you, did not think in terms of those kinds of numbers. I thought maybe 1,000. I almost apologize. I didn't know that.
No, we have 850 homeless people every night in our shelters, in all the shelters in Omaha.
The citywide census, I think last month was 842, somewhere in that area. And it stays in there.
Yeah, we do, one night a month, the Omaha Area Continuum of Care does a count of all of the people that are in the shelters and in the transitional living programs, and last month that was over 800 people. Unfortunately, that doesn't count all of the people, because that doesn't count those that are sleeping in their cars, as we've seen on the news the last few weeks, under bridges, doubled up in homes, families, that there may be 2 or 3 families in a home. So it's really difficult to get a real accurate count, but I think that Paul's pretty much on target probably with 1,500 a night.
Now, the political correctness of feeling empathy and or sympathy, which is not a word you like, but for the homeless or those that are in between homes, I mean, just have no way to pay or whatever, varies with the political climate. It varies with probably the economy, all kinds of things. How would you paint that picture now in terms of how, if I were the generic person of the United States, which is not, there is no such thing, but if I were, how do you think I would look upon our homeless, our displaced?
Well, I would say right now that I remember in the late 80s when homelessness was a big topic. It was very popular and chic to talk about it and to help people. And I think since that time, the interest has gone downhill somewhat in general. Although in Omaha, you know, in Omaha the people are tremendous, because I mean, we get so much given to us and donated, and we have so many volunteers that it's incredible. I mean, the people of Omaha really embrace what we're doing and what all the shelters are doing and help us out. So there is plenty of empathy here in our town, but that may not be the case in every town.
I think too, Carol, that the faces of homelessness have changed dramatically over the last decades. You know, when I was a kid growing up, there were the hobos that were down by the railroad tracks and riding the trains, and those used to be the ones that we considered homeless people. Homeless people today come from all walks of life. I know that Paul and I have talked about this. We've had, you know, doctors, lawyers, stockbrokers as clients in the shelters. And I think one of the reasons for that, and there are a variety of them, you know, domestic abuse, lack of decent affordable housing, loss of jobs, but one of the real serious problems that's happening in our city today is drug and alcohol abuse. And a great number of our people who come into the shelters have drug and alcohol problems or are dual diagnosed with mental illness and drug and alcohol problems.
In addition to that, out of 850 people who were in our shelters each night in September, 350 of them, about 45% of them, had substance abuse problems.
That does seem to be a key for a lot of people,
Yeah,
but
definitely.
you know, you want to avoid some sort of a stereotype. I think you do.
I think if we step back a little bit and take a look at, you ask what's society's perception of the homeless. As we went through welfare reform, which I think we all agree was a necessary thing to happen, the debate that was framed within welfare reform really demonized the poor and the economically disadvantaged. For some reason, in order to precipitate social change in our country, we have to have an enemy. And the debate that was going on is those people are ripping us off versus we invented a program that really doesn't work and it hasn't worked for 40 years. It seems like we didn't take responsibility for what we did as a society. And we blamed people who are economically disadvantaged and people who are homeless. The thing that I dislike hearing so often is those people are that way because they want to be. You know, here we have a city right now that is an economic boom. Why don't those people just stop doing what they're doing, go out and get jobs?
Oh yeah, here's the want ads, and you know, it weighs as much as a telephone book.
Exactly.
And if anyone that wants a job can have a job. I mean that, and then we've heard that many times.
But poverty is a secondary problem. As Judy said, and as Dan alluded to, is that we have to address the primary problems of homelessness before we can go after poverty. We have to deal with the problems of chronic mental illness, domestic violence, chronic addiction. 1/3 of the people that we serve are mentally ill. At the Santa Francis House, 85% of the people that we work with are chronically addicted. Their addictive behavior is moved beyond choice to disease. And those issues need to be addressed before we can say, well, why don't you go get a job?
Now wait, I work for a radio station, and every afternoon there's 3 hours of Dr. Laura, and she says that, and other people do too, that addiction is a choice and not a disease.
Well, it's amazing what a job will do for a person. I remember a young fellow coming in. He was married. He had several young children. This is years ago. And he was pretty lazy. And I really pushed him to get a job. And he didn't like it very well, but he went out and got a job. A few years later, he came back to me, and he came up to me and looked me in the eye, shook my hand, and said, "Thank you. You made me go out and get a job. And I want to thank you for that," because he was just a young kid, and apparently he didn't know how to work. And with a little push, a little help, he went out there and did it. Now, that's the case for some of our people, and they just need that extra push. But for others, those who are mentally ill, substance abuse, it's a little different story, because many of our people with substance abuse can get a job or have had a job, but they can't keep it. They lose the job continually for one reason or another, the temper, the alcohol, whatever. And so, as Paul mentioned, we have to go back and address that. But every case is a little bit different.
It said the poor will always be among us. And when we look at that, and if we look at those that are still, let's say, on welfare, some form of welfare, whether it be the formal welfare that comes in the form of a check or food stamps or whatever, or if it comes in the form of public welfare or community generosity welfare, and I'm not using that in a bad way, but some support, some public or private support. How do we know when we're gauging welfare reform and its success or failure, when we gauge just what's healthy? I mean, you've got families at Lydia House. You want families to be, children to be raised in a productive atmosphere. How do we gauge where to draw the line, when to push, a young man out the door who just hasn't quite got it yet?
I'm not too sure if we can find a standardized mechanism to do that.
But wouldn't
that
it be
seems
nice?
to be the problem.
Wouldn't it make public
would be
policy
nice.
just a
It would make
lot
our job
easier?
a lot easier.
Well, sure, that's a great broad brush approach to a simple answer for a very complex question. The reality of it is that Dan, with his experience, and Judy with her experience, and all the people who work within the continuum of care for the homeless, we have to judge that individually, that we can't take homeless people and make them into demographics and put them into a very neat little demographic cubbyhole, that we have to start pulling this out and looking at human beings as individuals and doing the best we can for each person to help them reach their full potential as individuals, whatever that potential is.
When you talk about continuum of care, I've heard that phrase is used in just general health circles. And I don't know if you borrowed it from that, but it means that you don't just throw them into a program. And there are a lot of, you might have to pull from this program, you might have to pull, but the idea is to get them on a continuum and follow them. And it takes many agencies. I think you told me, Paul, maybe 75?
There's 75 agencies that represent 175 different programs within the continuum, with the goal to create a seamless solution for people who are homeless, that you can go from a gatekeeper agency, which is usually a shelter, and to be able to help a person access the services that they need all the way through towards independent living.
Say they're abused or domestic violence, or they have addictive behaviors, or mentally ill. You need to pull from a lot, or
resources,
there's no moving forward at all, is there?
Right. There's a need for this collaborative type of effort. There's a need for Siena Francis House to have a collaborative effort with Charles Drew Healthcare, I don't want to be in the doctor business. They're very good at healthcare. That's why they run the clinic in our shelter. It's important for Community Alliance to have a collaborative effort with us. We have a psych clinic. Community Alliance coordinates that. They deal with mentally ill people who are economically disadvantaged. It's important for the Open Door Mission and the Siena Francis House and the Stevens Center and all of us to get together and say, these are the programs that we have. We have a component of a recovery program. Stevens Center has transitional living. Dan has the, Dan, the Disciple program. All of these are successful programs, and what we need to do is be able to have referrals. So if someone comes to me that's beyond our capacity to help, I can call up and we can have this communication, and we can refer to that person. We can refer that individual to an appropriate person.
Is there, are these services all available, and I guess from a cost point of view, I mean, are there the right kinds of services? I'm sure there are. They exist in a community this size. I mean, it's not like you're in Tecumseh and you you know, you would have to outsource to, you know,
I think what we have to realize is the limitations that are put on us financially. There isn't enough money for all of us to do everything that we want to do, or to fill all of the needs that exist today. What though? There are these programs that are available. Some people may have to wait to get into a certain program. The Shelter for Domestic Violence is full most of the time. So the shelters that deal with women end up becoming the safe houses until a person can get into that shelter and make that referral. Transitional living is filling up throughout the community. So it may take time. Those services are available, but we really do need to attract more resources to be able to strengthen the continuum and strengthen the programs within it.
Now,
One thing we would like to see, Carol, and we're working hard to do, is to involve the local church in it. Because, you know, before the government came along and decided that they were the guardians of the poor and other things, the church was really there for people who were struggling. And really the church has abdicated its role, I think, and they really need to take it back.
Well, you can go back to the way the friars took care of the poor in England, and Queen Bess came along and in essence set up the first formal welfare program. But you go
St.
from
Francis.
Well, I forgot about old St. Francis. Yeah.
St. Stephen.
And so you go, hence your names. But you can go back and historically look at these things, and I agree with you, and I think most people would. But you can't ever say one or the other. We've seen government doesn't work totally from a bureaucratic point of view, from the top down all the time. And we certainly, at any given time, the economy may not be that the churches and the people in them can always do it. Right now is maybe a good time.
Now is a good time, and we're looking for the churches, and we're wondering, you know, where are you? We really need their help.
One of the things, though, that we do, Carol, is that we try, through the continuum of care, to assess the needs of the community and to work together to prioritize those needs. And so, as Paul said, the resources, you know, there's a constant need for resources, but if we can get together as a community who serves the homeless and work on what is it that they really need, then sometimes we can get those things in.
Is doing that better than it used to be? Now, I recall.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, much better.
I'm that old. No, and it wasn't that long ago, but it wasn't like yesterday. That, I hate to say turf wars, but certainly maybe scarce resources forced maybe some, you know, I've got to take care of my people, and you've got to deal with. You all seem to be working together really well.
Well, that's the concept of the continuum. Where that came from was when Jack Kemp was the Secretary of HUD. It was recognized, they did a study that was published during the Bush administration, I think is when it was actually published. It was called Mean Streets. And they identified that turfism that existed among human service agencies. He also identified that there was a need to overcome this and realized that we wouldn't do it voluntarily. What he proposed was a series of grants through HUD And he said, unless you get together and create a continuum, we're not going to give you money. So we all grabbed each other's hands and sang Kumbaya. And
A little kumbaya is good for the soul, yeah.
but it goes beyond that. What happened here in Omaha is that city planning and Mike Sacklar and Gary Pryor encouraged this a great deal, and every administration since then has supported this. Is that we decided to create a very viable working continuum of care that would go beyond the minimum requirements set by HUD and make something that's going to work well.
So you weren't the little kids that said, okay, Mom and Dad, all right, I'll do what I have to do.
Not at all. We were encouraged to make this thing viable. We meet monthly. We have a peer-based program where we take a look at and we evaluate each other's agencies. The way that we look at grant money that comes in is all the grant recipients come together and prioritize and create it from within. So it's very empowering for us as organizations. And I think that we've learned to negotiate through our differences. We've learned to understand why where the priorities belong. And I'm very energized by it. And I'm not just saying that because this year I had the privilege to be the president. It's that I've seen this thing grow, and in all honesty,
you've been around a while.
I've been here for 11 years.
You've all been involved in this kind of service.
I didn't think too much of it when I first heard the concept, but I've really seen it be driven, and I've seen everyone else make a contribution to see that this thing is successful.
And in the end, isn't it beneficial for the face of the people you're representing, the collective face,
Certainly.
to have, and I hate to use the word clout, but I mean, there is certainly strength in numbers.
Yeah, there's definitely a benefit to the homeless and those people who are struggling when we can recommend and refer them to somebody else who can help them with their particular needs. It's really a great thing. In fact, a lot of cities sort of envy what we have here.
Wow. If you talked about prioritizing. If you were sitting at your table with your continuum of care group members, and I'm sure you're always feeling, God, I wish we had more of that. I wish we had more of that. But if you said today, and we each had to list something that we are short of, even in this, having a metro community that is fairly giving compared to some, what would, if you each had to name something, what would it be that is really needed right now? Besides money and volunteers.
Yeah, I was going to say, financial resources to be able to
for what?
fund the programs that
Name a
provide
program.
solutions for our niche program. We have a substance abuse recovery program that needs to expand. We have also, on any given night, we've got 84 beds in our men's shelter. We sleep an average of 150. This winter will exceed probably 200 people on the coldest nights. We need to get those people off the floor and give them a place to sleep with dignity, and we need to increase the solution, which I believe for our population, our niche, would be the substance abuse programs.
Judy?
I think that probably both transitional and permanent housing would be a thing that I would like to see happen. Because people who are in recovery and have gone through a program, nobody is cured, if that be the word that we use, in 60 or 90 days. And so if we can give them a couple of years in a transitional living facility where they can have the continued support of those programs, then we stand a better chance of recovery and of them going on to become self-sufficient tax-paying citizens again.
Where pressures maybe slowly increase. I mean, you can't just say, okay, here and maybe here's a little subsidized housing and have a job. I mean, this is a long haul to be able to take the world back on.
Yeah, in our program, they meet with a case manager every week for about the first 3 months after they're out of the program. And then that kind of dwindles off, and then we encourage them to find support outside of the Stevens Center and to, and to try to encourage them to build support within their families and their jobs. We also have found that the people who are in the transitional living units bond together and form a community.
And they support one another.
And they support one another, yeah.
Pastor Dan?
Well, I'm a pastor, so I'll probably take a little different track, but
no, that's just, it's just a parallel track.
Yeah, one of the biggest things that I see that we need is the spiritual component to to our people. We live in a society today that sort of dismisses spirituality to a large degree, and that we're our own people, we can make our own way. And I think we've really forgotten God in the mix. And when we leave him out, it's not surprising that things go downhill. So, you know, as I mentioned before, I would really like to see the church get more involved to tell people who are struggling that somebody else really cares about you. It makes a difference to us what happens to you. We want you to be a part of our family. Not that you have to join our church, but we want to be part of the solution, and we want to help you. And so,
well, certainly the whole idea that is part of the 90s and I fear into the year 2000 is that we can control our own destiny completely, and when we find out we can't, we tend to lose our way. I mean, and that's just, I mean, that goes up and down the scale, so I mean, certainly there's some help there. We have just a couple of minutes left. If you had to say to Mayor Giuliani of New York, who said, get a job or get out of our public New York shelters, which we promised to you several years ago if you were in need of them, what would you say if you were writing your email, typing your letter, what would you say? Judy?
I would tell him that he needs to wake up and smell the roses. I think that, as Paul alluded to before, you know, we can't solve the problems of homelessness until we solve the root causes of homelessness. And what is it, you know, that those people need so that they can again, you know, become self-sufficient and taking care of themselves and their families.
Or at least somewhat sufficient.
Or
all
somewhat
may not
sufficient,
be
right. You know, because some of
destined to be
those,
self-sufficient.
yeah, but you know, I think that the approach that he's taking, I mean, I was really appalled when I read the article you sent. I thought, you know, and by his own admission, he said that many of the people are mentally ill, many of them are substance abusers, and until those problems are addressed, there's not a whole lot we can do.
You folks are traditionally pretty wide, and maybe not. Stevens Center is getting a bigger name, but certainly the Santa Francis House and Open Door Mission Lydia House have a good name. If people just wanted to find out in general about the homeless situation, is there a website? Is there a place that they can just become educated?
There is a website on Angel Fire, and I think if they type in keyword OACCH, Omaha Area Continuum of Care for the Homeless, they should be able to find it through a search engine. If not, they can contact me at Santa Francis House. Judy has it, I'm sure Dan has it, or any of the area shelters, and we'd be happy to give them the web address. That lists all the agencies and all the programs that are available.
Well, time flies when you're learning, and I want to thank you very much, Paul Koch, Judy Mascarello, and Pastor Dan Hovanek. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And
Thanks for having us.
Think about the homeless this time of the year and all year.
Consider This with Carol Schrader is made possible with support from Bass & Associates and First Data Resources.